I was halfway through a cannonball into my own pool when HOA Karen tried to have me arrested for trespassing. Yeah, arrested. For being in the backyard I've lived in for years. The splash hadn't even settled when she exploded through my side gate like a budget action movie villain, visor crooked, phone held out like a federal badge. You're trespassing on HOA property. I've already called 911, she screamed, filming me as if I were some wild criminal caught in the act of enjoying my Saturday. I stood there dripping, towel barely on, wondering which part of reality she'd fallen off of. Because here's the twist. Until that exact moment, I didn't even know I was in an HOA. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. But that didn't stop her from unleashing the most unhinged campaign of fake rules, bogus fines, and late-night surveillance this neighborhood has ever seen. Before we dive into the chaos, drop your city and local time in the comments, and if you love HOA drama as much as I do, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the madness that's coming next. The heat that afternoon felt like it was draped over the entire neighborhood, the kind of heavy summer air that made even the birds sound exhausted. I had spent the entire morning mowing the front yard, edging the driveway, trimming the hedges, and repairing that wobbly pool ladder. I kept swearing I'd fix next weekend. By noon, sweat soaked through my shirt, grass clippings stuck to my legs, and I convinced myself that I had earned a few hours, just a few of silence and chlorinated bliss. That was supposed to be the plan: float, relax, speak to absolutely no one, maybe finally finish that mystery novel I'd been picking up and putting down for 3 months. Life felt simple for about 19 minutes, until Karen happened. To really appreciate the level of chaos that woman brought into my life, you need to understand the peace I thought I had before she barged into my yard, like she owned the deed to the neighborhood. When I bought the house, it was the backyard that won me over. It sat on a wider-than-average lot with old oak shade on one side and a concrete patio leading to a rectangular pool on the other. A place where I imagined grilling steaks, unwinding after work, and maybe hosting the occasional birthday get-together for nieces and nephews. I'm a middle-aged guy, not exactly a party animal. Quiet was the whole point. The neighborhood itself seemed harmless too. A couple of retired couples, a handful of young families, a few people who kept to themselves. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, nothing. Karen, I first heard her name 6 days after moving in, during a conversation with my neighbor, Doug, a friendly guy in his 60s who always carried a coffee mug no matter the time of day. "You'll like it here," he'd said. "Only thing to watch out for is, well, HOA, Karen." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. Every neighborhood has a Karen, right? Some over-enthusiastic lady who complains when trash cans aren't pulled in by noon. It didn't sound like a situation that involved police, trespassing accusations, or emotional damage delivered in a pink visor. What I didn't realize then was that Doug wasn't warning me about a type. He was warning me about a force of nature. But before we get to the hurricane, let's talk about the paperwork storm that came long before her. When I purchased the house, the closing paperwork felt like flipping through a phone book while blindfolded. The real estate agent skimmed each page with the speed of someone who'd rehearsed the script 1,000 times. Sign here, initial here, date here. I trusted him. Maybe too much. Somewhere in that mountain of documents, buried in legal jargon and acronyms, were references to something called the Maple Ridge Estates Association. I didn't think much of it. It didn't say fees were due, didn't say amenities were shared, didn't say the HOA was even active, and since nobody ever contacted me, billed me, emailed me, or welcomed me to anything, I assumed my area wasn't part of it. Turns out, that assumption was the seed of a much bigger problem. Now, about Karen, if someone told me she was born with a whistle around her neck and a clipboard in her hand, I'd believe it without hesitation. She had this uncanny ability to appear out of nowhere, especially when people were doing things she deemed unregulated. I once saw her lecture a teenager for using roller skates on a sidewalk. She told a couple hosting a baby shower that their balloons violated community elevation standards. The woman nearly called the fire department because someone's wind chimes were emotionally disruptive. She dressed like a tourist who had lost a bet, visor, giant sunglasses, floral blouse that somehow radiated hostility, and a fanny pack filled with who knows what, probably spare violation notices. I only had one brief encounter with her before the pool incident. She knocked on my door with the authority of a tax collector and introduced herself as the head of community standards. I didn't realize she'd given herself that title. Her first words to me weren't, "Hello, welcome," or "Nice to meet you." They were, "Your pool is not in compliance with the community aesthetic." That should have been my sign, my flashing neon warning sign. But I shrugged it off. I told her politely that I wasn't part of the HOA, and she blinked at me like I had just confessed to a crime. She frowned, scribbled something on her clipboard, and stepped off my porch without another word. I assumed that was the end of it. I was wrong, spectacularly wrong, because on that blistering hot Saturday, while I was enjoying my first quiet moment in days, I heard the unmistakable slap 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 of rubber flip-flops approaching fast. You know that sound, that rapid, angry cadence of someone marching with purpose? That was my storm warning. Then, she burst through my side gate without knocking, without announcing herself, without even pretending she had permission. Just boom. Gate opens, phone recording, sunglasses angled downward like a hawk sizing up prey. And she yelled at the top of her lungs, "You're trespassing on HOA property." Those words echoed in my head long after the splash of my cannonball faded. I stared at her, stunned, towel slipping from my shoulder, water pooling at my feet. My brain couldn't process the idea that someone had just accused me of trespassing in my own backyard. I told her calmly that she was mistaken, that this was my property, and that she needed to leave. She smirked, actually smirked, and doubled down. "This land falls under HOA jurisdiction," she said. "That pool is technically communal space. We had a vote, without me, about my pool." I laughed because the alternative was screaming, but she wasn't laughing, she was dialing. And within minutes, she had 911 dispatch on the line. I overheard every absurd word. A man is refusing to leave HOA property. He's violating community rules. He's using the pool without permission. It was surreal. Like watching someone narrate a documentary about an alternate universe where I was the villain. I tried reasoning with her, but reasoning with Karen was like trying to argue with a car alarm. It only gets louder. And when the sheriff's deputies arrived 10 minutes later, that's when my stomach twisted for the first time. Because even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, even though I had the deed, the keys, the mortgage statement, having law enforcement show up because your neighbor claims you're trespassing on your own land does something to your nerves. One deputy chewed gum like he was in a competition. The other looked like the son had personally wronged him. They listened to her dramatic retelling of the situation, complete with phrases like community integrity and unauthorized water usage, before turning to me. "Sir, do you live here?" I nodded, dripping, clutching my beach towel like a confused suburban ghost. "I can get my paperwork," I said, and that moment standing barefoot, soaking wet, explaining to armed professionals that yes, I do indeed live where I was swimming, was the first time a bizarre thought hit me. What if, buried somewhere deep in all that real estate paperwork, Karen wasn't entirely wrong? I didn't want to believe it. But when the deputies mentioned they needed to check the county's records to verify HOA boundaries, something in my chest tightened. For the first time, the idea crept in, what if I was in the HOA and didn't know it? What began as a funny misunderstanding suddenly felt a lot less funny. And as Karen stood behind the deputies with her arms crossed like a judgmental flamingo, I realized something. This wasn't just about a pool. This was the opening shot of a war I didn't know I'd enlisted in. The deputies followed me toward the patio, their boots clacking against the concrete while water dripped from my hair and trailed behind me like I was molten chlorine. I pulled open the outdoor storage cabinet, grabbed the manila folder where I kept the deed and survey documents, and walked it over to them. Gum Chewer took the folder, flipping through it with the slow, deliberate squint of someone who expected to find a trapdoor hidden between the pages. Behind him, Karen hovered like an angry helium balloon. She paced, she filmed, she narrated. She's not documenting evidence, I thought. She's creating an episode for an imaginary HOA crime show. The deputies finished their initial look and stepped aside to radio the county records department. Meanwhile, Karen marched around the pool deck like she was hosting a guided tour of a crime scene, and here, she announced to nobody, is where he violated Section 14, misuse of communal water facilities. She pointed at my pool like it had personally betrayed her. I wrapped the towel tighter around myself, partly from irritation, partly because the breeze was making me shiver. But most of all, I was trying to keep my patience from leaking out of me. After a few minutes, The taller deputy, still squinting beneath the sun, walked back toward us. "Ma'am," he said, "county mapping shows this lot was originally included in a planned HOA development, but," he raised a hand when Karen opened her mouth, "but there's no record confirming that this section was formally annexed. That means its status is unclear." Karen blinked, stunned. "Unclear. That's impossible," she snapped. "We had votes. We had forms." The deputy nodded patiently. "Ma'am, plan does not always mean executed. We need more information before we can say either way." My stomach lurched. Unclear? I hadn't expected that. A weird fear crept in, small at first, but growing, because I remembered suddenly how rushed the house closing process felt, how I'd signed page after page without reading every paragraph, how the real estate agent brushed things aside with phrases like standard language and just boilerplate, how the title officer never actually said the words, "You are not in an HOA." Had there been something buried in that paperwork? Some tiny clause? Some optional inclusion that had been quietly activated by a previous owner? Some ambiguous line that people like Karen would pounce on? I didn't want to believe it, but uncertainty is a powerful thing. The deputy handed my papers back. "Sir, everything indicates you own this property outright. There's nothing here stating the HOA has authority, but county records are incomplete. We'll need to follow up." Karen folded her arms, triumphant. "Incomplete records," she repeated smugly, "which means, until clarified, he should abide by HOA regulations. That's how it works." "That's not how it works," the deputy said immediately. "And this isn't a criminal matter. We're closing this call." Karen's mouth fell open so wide I swear a dragonfly could have flown inside and rented it as an apartment. "You're just gonna leave," she shrieked. The gum-chewing deputy shrugged. "Ma'am, it's a civil dispute, not police business, but he's trespassing on community property." The deputy looked at me, wet, barefoot, holding my towel like a toga, and then at the perfectly normal suburban backyard behind me. "Ma'am," he sighed, "it's a swimming pool, not a federal monument." I had to look away to hide the laugh, threatening to burst out. Karen, however, was not amused. She stomped her foot, an actual full-body, toddler-style stomp, before pointing at me like a prosecuting attorney mid-meltdown. "This isn't over. I will bring this to the board." The deputies headed toward their cruiser, shaking their heads. The sunburned one gave me a subtle, sympathetic nod, the exact expression a man gives another man who's dealing with a very specific flavor of misery. When they pulled away, the neighborhood fell quiet again. Even the birds seemed like they were holding their breath. Karen turned back to me slowly, like a malfunctioning animatronic figure at a theme park. "You've embarrassed me," she hissed. "You called the cops on me for swimming in my own pool?" I replied. "I think the embarrassment took care of itself," she gasped, wheeled around, and stormed back out through the gate, leaving it swinging open behind her like a wounded soldier. As soon as she was gone, I exhaled long and hard, sinking onto a pool chair, my pulse finally slowing. But the nausea stayed, not because I was afraid of Karen, but because of the unknown. Was my house, maybe, sort of, technically in an HOA? I needed answers. That night, I sat at the dining table, spreading out every piece of closing paperwork I still had. I sifted through title documents, survey sketches, CC and Rs, disclosure statements, and a bunch of things I probably should have read more carefully the first time. My eyes burned, my brain spun, and my nerves frayed with each page. Some lines referenced Maple Ridge Estates Association, others said optional annexation phase, others said HOA coverage areas to be finalized by developer at a future date. Future date? Was this a future date? Was I living inside some kind of HOA Schrodinger's box? Around midnight? I found the strangest detail yet, a tiny note about future amenities designation pending county confirmation. Amenities? My pool wasn't built by the HOA. It came with the house. What amenity could they possibly mean? I set the papers down, rubbed my temples, and realized with dawning horror that the root of the problem wasn't imagined, it was paperwork. Old paperwork, messy paperwork, unfinished paperwork, exactly the kind of thing someone like Karen would twist into a weapon. I needed more than a stack of half-useful documents. I needed someone who actually knew how HOA boundaries were formed, approved, and enforced. Someone who had access to the real developer files, not just scraps stuffed in the dark corners of my closing packet. The next morning, coffee in hand and nerves steeled, I walked into the Maple Ridge HOA office. The lobby smelled like printer toner and lemon cleaner. Behind the front desk sat a woman in her 40s with tired eyes but a kind smile. "Janet?" "Hi," I said. "I think there's been a mistake regarding my home. I need help figuring out whether I'm actually part of this HOA." The moment I said my address, her eyebrows shot up. "Oh," she breathed, the way doctors do before delivering complicated news. "You're in the gray zone." "The what?" She grabbed a binder thick enough to use as a weapon and flipped it open. "Your row of homes," she explained, "was supposed to be annexed into the HOA during Phase 2. The developer wrote up proposals, drafted maps, even circulated a preliminary vote, but the annexation was never finalized. No signatures, no county filings, no official approval. So, I'm not in the HOA?" She gave a hesitant tilt of her hand. "Legally, it appears not, but the old maps make it look like you should be, which is why Karen thinks she owns my pool," I muttered. Janet sighed. "Karen thinks she owns many things. She used to be on the board, very enthusiastically. So enthusiastically that the other board members had resigned within the year, apparently." "Can you put something in writing for me?" I asked, just clarifying that my home isn't under HOA jurisdiction. She hesitated, biting her lip. "We need to verify everything formally, dig through old developer files, check county archives. It might take a few days, meaning Karen had a few days head start." I walked out of the office, uneasy, not defeated, but not confident either. The ambiguity hung over me like a storm cloud. When I got home, a single sheet of paper fluttered in my mailbox. Bright pink marker, all caps, underlined 3 times. "You are in violation of HOA rules. Fines will accumulate until you comply." No signature, no letterhead, no shame. I looked toward Karen's house. Her blinds twitched. This wasn't misunderstanding anymore. This was a declaration of war. And little did I know, this was just the warm-up act. The pink note in my hand looked like it had been written by someone gripping the marker so tightly it nearly snapped. The letters slanted aggressively to the right, each stroke a desperate attempt at authority. I read it twice, then a third time, and by the fourth I was laughing like a man who had officially crossed the threshold into madness. Violation of HOA rules. Fines will accumulate. What fines? What rules? What HOA? For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, the morning sun beating down on my shoulders, trying to convince myself that this was still the real world and not some bizarre sitcom episode where the villain wore floral blouses and weaponized stationery. But the laughter faded quickly, replaced by a sinking feeling deep in my stomach, because Karen wasn't just leaving notes, she was escalating. And people like her, they never escalate just once. I took the note inside, tossed it onto the kitchen table, and paced my living room like an animal, trying to outrun its own thoughts. Now that I knew my property was sitting in some bureaucratic limbo annexed on paper but not in law, I understood why she felt entitled. All she needed was a scrap of ambiguity, a sliver of daylight, and she'd wedge herself into it like a territorial raccoon. I figured I'd cool off with a walk around the backyard, fresh air, maybe some shade under the oak tree, something to break the tension building behind my ribs, but as I stepped out, the crunch of paper under my shoe stopped me cold. Another notice, this one tucked under a decorative rock by the back steps. A printed sheet with a fake HOA letterhead she must have copied off Google. Notice of non-compliance, it read. Unauthorized private use of community swimming facility. She'd even assigned me a violation number, like she was tracking me in some personal spreadsheet of neighborhood offenders. Oh, she's lost her mind? I muttered to myself, folding the paper carefully. Actually, not just folding, preserving, because something in me clicked. I needed to keep everything. Every note, every fake fine, every petty attempt at control, all of it. People like Karen thrive in shadows, in ambiguity, in he said, she said battles. But if she wanted a war, I intended to document every single shot she fired. The doorbell rang. I nearly jumped. Did she have sensors detecting whenever I touched one of her ridiculous notices? Nope, just the mailman, who greeted me with a weary smile. You the guy with the pool drama? He asked casually. My eyes widened. Already, he chuckled. Buddy? She was talking about you yesterday at the community mailboxes. said you were refusing to comply with water use regulations. Whatever that means, it meant Karen had officially launched her smear campaign. I thanked him and shut the door, leaning against it with a groan. She wasn't just playing HOA police. She was building a narrative, a story where she was the guardian of community standards, and I was the outlaw, splashing recklessly in forbidden waters. What I didn't know yet was that her campaign had already reached half the neighborhood. That afternoon, while I sat at my patio table, sifting through paperwork, Doug wandered over with his mug of coffee, the same one he always carried. Even at 3 p.m., like a man whose bloodstream was 40% caffeine. "You doing okay?" he asked, studying my expression. "I'm being hunted by a woman who thinks she owns my backyard," I answered. "So no, not really." Doug sighed and nodded knowingly. "She used to do this to the last guy too. Accused him of violating garbage bin alignment standards. He moved 2 months after she started leaving notes on his windshield." "Windshield," I repeated. "She leaves notes on cars. Only when she's feeling bold," Doug said with a grimace. "When she gets creative, she starts making up violations nobody's ever heard of." I gestured to the stack of papers beside me. "Already happening." He squinted at them. "Oh boy, she's in rare form." As if summoned by her own reputation, the faintest rustle came from over the fence. Doug and I froze, and then a camera flash. "Is she taking pictures of your pool?" he whispered. I nodded slowly. "I think she's creating a case file." Doug took a long sip of his coffee. "I'd get cameras if I were you." The idea hit me like a spark. Cameras, evidence, proof. If Karen wanted to play detective, I would give her her own documentary, one where she was the main character digging her own grave. That evening, I drove to the hardware store and returned with 2 motion-triggered security cameras and a video doorbell. Installing them was oddly satisfying, like mounting defenses before a siege. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, I had full surveillance on my yard, driveway, mailbox, and side gate. Let her try something now, but even I wasn't prepared for what the footage would show. The next morning, coffee in hand, I sat down to review the night's recordings. The first few clips were normal branches, swaying, a squirrel sprinting across the fence, a stray cat investigating a flower pot. Then I reached 2:13 a.m. There she was, Karen, in a robe with lavender clouds on it, crouched low like a suburban ninja, holding a flashlight between her teeth, in her hands a stack of pink notes. She crept across my driveway, glanced around like she was infiltrating a high-security facility, and stuffed one into my mailbox. Then another under the welcome mat. Then she tiptoed to the side of the house, looked up at one of my windows, and whispered something I couldn't hear but absolutely did not want to know. Then she bolted, full sprint, robe flapping behind her like a deranged cape. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure whether to be disturbed or impressed. This woman had crossed from annoying neighbor territory straight into unhinged vigilante territory, and she wasn't even pretending to be subtle about it. I went outside and checked the mailbox. Sure enough, another notice: unauthorized pool sound levels detected after sunset. I looked around at my completely quiet, completely empty yard. Sound levels of what? I asked aloud. Crickets? Inside? I recorded everything in a neatly organized digital folder labeled Karen Evidence. Each file had a timestamp, a summary, and supporting photos. If this ever went to court, I was going to walk in like Sherlock Holmes with PowerPoint. But Karen wasn't done. Around noon, as I settled into my recliner with the vague hope of relaxing for 5 minutes, there was a knock at the door. A firm knock, not neighborly, official, animal control. The officer stood there with a clipboard and a puzzled expression. "Sir, we received a report of potentially aggressive animals on this property." I blinked once, twice. Animals. He checked the form. A pit bull, a parrot, and a goat. I stared at him, expression hollow. "I have none of those." He peeked over my shoulder into the house. "Mind if I take a look?" I led him through the backyard, where the only wildlife present were 2 squirrels fighting over a bird feeder and an inflatable flamingo floating lazily in the pool. The officer sighed, apologetic. "Sir, it happens sometimes. False reports, like calling 911 on a man in his own pool, like sending notices from an HOA I wasn't even part of." My jaw clenched. This wasn't annoyance anymore. This wasn't mild harassment. This was obsessive interference backed by lies. When the officer left, Shaking his head, I stood by my pool and felt something inside me shift. Something firm, something final. Karen wanted a war, fine. But she wasn't going to like the part where I stopped playing defense, because now that her madness had crossed into official channels, police, animal control, neighborhood gossip, I realized one thing clearly: if I didn't shut this down, she'd keep escalating until she decided the air I breathed needed HOA approval. I marched inside and grabbed my keys. It was time to go back to county records, time to dig deeper than any busybody with a fake badge ever had, time to find the truth buried under paperwork, confusion, and legal dust and drag it into the light before Karen twisted it into something unrecognizable. And little did I know, the truth I was about to uncover would be the very weapon that turned the entire neighborhood against her. County records smelled like old paper, coffee cups no one ever washed, and the faint disappointment of underpaid public employees. The lobby was a maze of beige walls and bulletin boards plastered with outdated zoning maps. A lone ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, stirring absolutely no air but giving the illusion of effort. I stepped up to the front desk, where a clerk in her 50s looked at me with that special blend of curiosity and resignation, the face of a woman who had seen enough strange property disputes to write a memoir. "Morning," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I need information on the HOA boundaries for Maple Ridge Estates, specifically whether my property was ever legally annexed." She typed my address into her computer. The keyboard clicks echoed through the empty lobby like someone tapping a suspenseful drum. After a moment, she frowned, not a confused frown, an annoyed, bureaucratically offended one. "Oh," she murmured. "It's one of those—" "One of what?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. It displayed a map with several shaded zones, each representing phases of the planned community. My street was in a lighter shade, boxed in by dashed lines that didn't match anything around them. The lot numbers were there, but the official stamps were missing. No signatures, no dates, no county approval. It looks like the developer filed a proposal to extend the HOA, but it was never fully processed, the clerk explained. They submitted it, but they didn't finalize it. They didn't pay the administrative fee, didn't file the annexation certification, and let me check. She clicked a few times, then pointed at the screen. "Yep, no community vote logged either. So my house isn't in the HOA." She shrugged. "On paper, no. On preliminary draft maps, kinda. In the minds of people who don't know how the process works, very yes." I rubbed a hand over my face. "And is that legally binding? Drafts? Absolutely not," she said firmly. "Until the annexation is filed with the county and approved, it's meaningless." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. A slow, heavy breath that left my chest deflating like a punctured pool float. But then she added one more sentence, one that made my relief skid to a halt. "But someone who doesn't understand the law could easily misinterpret this and assume your block was annexed. Someone named Karen. Is there any official document you can print that confirms the annexation never occurred?" I asked. She nodded. "I can get you a certified copy of the non-annexation status. It'll take about 20 minutes. 20 minutes was nothing. I could fight 10 Karens in 20 minutes. I'd wait all day if it meant ending this madness." While I waited, I sat on a hard plastic chair, flipping through the HOA proposal binder the clerk had shown me. The more I read, the angrier I got. The HOA had intended to include my block, but the developer abandoned Phase 2 after running out of money. There were even scribbled notes in the margins. "Hold until funding approved, pending legal review," and, shockingly, "no consent from homeowners yet." No consent, yet Karen believed she owned my entire backyard by divine HOA decree. The clerk eventually returned with a beautifully stamped, embossed certificate, stating, in no uncertain terms, "Parcel 17B remains outside the jurisdiction of Maple Ridge Estates Association. No annexation has been approved, recorded, or legally recognized." I held the paper like it was the Holy Grail. "Thank you," I said, sincerely. "You have no idea how much this helps." "Oh, I have an idea," she said dryly. "We get trouble with that HOA at least twice a year." I froze. "With Karen." She gave me a look. "We don't name names here, but yes, with Karen, armed with proof." I left the county office feeling like a knight who had just picked up an enchanted sword. I couldn't wait to show this to Janet at the HOA office. to finally shut down Karen's fantasy empire of fake rules and pink markers, but life and Karen had other plans. When I pulled into my driveway, 2 neighbors were standing at the end of it, whispering in that way people do when they don't want to seem like they're whispering. As soon as they saw me, they straightened up. "Hey," one of them said awkwardly. Everything okay?" I stopped, wary. "Define okay?" They exchanged a look. The second neighbor sighed. "She's been going door to door," he said, handing out flyers. "About you," the first added. I closed my eyes. Of course she was. Of course she was expanding her turf war into propaganda. Wordlessly, they handed me one of the flyers, a poorly designed sheet with stretched clip art, bold fonts, and grammar so mangled it should have been illegal. Across the top, "Community alert, pool abuser, refuses to follow HOA rules." Under that, a bullet list: unauthorized personal monopolization of HOA pool, failure to comply with fee requirements, disrespecting community standards, aggressive behavior toward HOA representative. Aggressive. I stared at the sheet, baffled. The only aggressive one was the woman who filmed me half-dressed and called 911 over a splash. My neighbors looked embarrassed. "We know it's ridiculous," one said, "but she's telling people your pool used to be an HOA asset before the previous owner privatized it." "Privatized it?" I repeated, dumbfounded. "She talks like your backyard got stolen from the community," the other said. "People aren't buying it, but, well, she's loud, persistent, and absolutely allergic to facts." I thanked them and walked up to the house, gripping the flyer like evidence from a crime scene. Inside, I placed it next to the growing stack of Karen grams. The pile was starting to look less like nuisance and more like ammunition. I turned on my newly installed security system, eager to see if last night had any other surprises. It did. Footage from around 4:30 a.m. showed Karen standing across the street holding a clipboard, watching my house as if waiting for it to confess to a crime. Every few minutes, she wrote something down. At one point, she paced in a circle. At another, she pointed at my sidewalk and nodded to herself in a, "Yes, that's a violation" sort of way. I paused the video, staring at the frozen image of her looking deranged under the streetlight. This wasn't enforcement, this wasn't oversight, this was obsession. It reminded me of stories you hear about old-timey monarchs who slowly lose their grasp on reality and start inventing enemies to fight. And apparently, I'd been cast as her new nemesis. Enough was enough. I grabbed the certified non-annexation document and marched to the HOA office. Janet was eating yogurt behind her desk, eyes weary but alert. "I have news," I said, handing her the document. She read it, eyes widened, shoulders slumped in relief. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. "I knew there was no formal annexation, but we didn't have this. This is going to end everything." I exhaled, but she held up a hand. "Well, end it for you," she clarified. "But Karen, she won't take this well." I sighed. "She's already gone full Shakespearean villain on me. I don't think she can escalate much further." Janet shook her head. "Oh, she can escalate." I learned Janet was right faster than I expected. When I got home, a bright yellow envelope was taped to my front door. A new notice, 3 pages long, typed, formatted, signed with a loopy so-called HOA authorized representative signature. It claimed I owed $1, 200 inches retroactive pool usage fees. I laughed, I cackled, I sounded unhinged myself. Because here's the thing. Karen had no idea I'd just obtained the one document capable of burning her entire fantasy regime to the ground. But before I showed it to her, before the showdown that was rapidly approaching, I wanted to gather just a little more leverage, the kind that would make sure she didn't just back off, but never tried anything like this again. And as the sun set behind my house, painting the pool water gold, one thought solidified in my mind. Karen had drawn the battle lines. Now it was time to end the war. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid of Karen, but because my brain was sprinting laps around the same question. How far would she go now that the foundation of her imaginary empire was about to crumble? By morning, I had an answer, not in theory, but in the form of 3 more notices shoved under my welcome mat. One accused me of failure to maintain acceptable yard feng shui. Another warned me that upcoming HOA inspections would determine whether my patio furniture met community relaxation standards. The last one simply read, "Final warning, you cannot ignore the HOA. It had her handwriting all over it, sharp angles, frantic loops, ink smudged like she had written it mid-rampage. I bent down to pick them up, but before I could stand straight, I heard the sound of gravel crunching. I turned to see Karen marching down the sidewalk with a stack of papers under one arm and a megaphone in the other. A megaphone! She lifted it to her mouth, pressed the trigger, and blasted her voice across the entire block. "Attention neighbors. We have a community violator who refuses to comply with HOA standards." Blinds opened up and down the street. Dogs barked. A kid on a bicycle nearly toppled over. I felt my soul leave my body. I put my hands on my hips and stared at her. "Karen, put the megaphone down." She swung it toward me. "You can't silence the HOA. You're not in the HOA leadership," I said flatly. She smirked with the confidence of someone who believed rules didn't apply to her. Leadership is about spirit, not title. Oh God, this woman was 2 tantrums away from wearing a cape and calling herself Commander of Community Compliance. Before I could reply, Janet pulled up in her car like she'd been summoned by divine intervention or an HOA distress beacon. She stepped out, slammed her car door, and marched toward us with the gait of a woman who had reached the end of her patience with all forms of suburban stupidity. "Karen," Janet barked, "turn off the megaphone." Karen turned toward her with the expression of a toddler caught drawing on the wall. "I am enforcing community values." She insisted. "No," Janet said sharply. "You are violating at least 6 statutes of the state noise ordinance. And more importantly, you're misrepresenting the HOA." Karen lowered the megaphone slightly. "Someone has to. No one else is stepping up to protect this neighborhood." "Because no one asked you to," Janet snapped. I almost applauded. Karen huffed, her face contorting into the familiar shape of impending meltdown. I could practically see steam curling from her ears. "You're both conspiring against me," she spat. "But the board will side with me. They always do." Janet exchanged a look with me, a look that said, "Oh boy, she really doesn't know." "Karen," Janet said gently, "you're not on the board anymore. You haven't been for over a year." Karen's expression cracked. "What do you mean I'm not on the board?" "I mean exactly what I said. You were removed, unanimously." Karen blinked rapidly, as if hoping the world might unfocus and reassemble into a version she preferred. "That vote was illegitimate," she whispered. "No," Janet corrected. "Your unauthorized violations and misuse of authority were illegitimate." Karen looked like she might faint, or scream, or spontaneously combust. Hard to tell. Janet turned to me, clearing her throat. "Do you have the document from the county?" I pulled the certified non-annexation certificate from my pocket and handed it over. She held it up so Karen could see the embossed seal glinting in the sunlight. "Your neighbor's property," Janet declared, "is not part of the HOA legally. It has never been. All notices you issued are invalid. All fees you threatened are fraudulent, and your harassment must stop immediately." Silence fell over the street. Even the birds seemed to pause. Karen stared at the paper like it was a death certificate for her authority. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like she was struggling to reboot. Finally, she croaked, "This isn't real. You're lying. You're both lying." Janet sighed. "Karen, go home." Karen didn't move. "Now," Janet added. Slowly, very slowly, Karen began backing away. Tight, jerky steps, clutching the megaphone like a shield. She reached her driveway, fumbling for her keys with trembling hands, and disappeared inside her house without another word. The door slammed. A moment later, her blinds snapped shut. Janet exhaled hard, rubbing her forehead. "I'm sorry you've had to deal with this. Truly, it's not your fault," I said, "but I appreciate you stepping in." "She's been getting worse," Janet admitted quietly, "but this is the first time her behavior spilled into something this big." I nodded. "The notes, the flyers, the fake fines?" "The megaphone, yeah, big." Janet looked genuinely troubled. "If she does anything else, let me know immediately." I promised I would. After she left, the neighborhood slowly returned to life. Curtains parted, people stepped outside. Doug wandered over like a man emerging from a bunker after a hurricane. "So," he said, sipping his eternal coffee, "sounds like the HOA storm has downgraded. For now," I replied. Because the thing about Karen wasn't her loudness, it was her persistence. and I knew, absolutely knew, that the second she felt cornered, she'd come back swinging with something new, something stranger, something more chaotic than a megaphone announcement, and I was right. The next blow arrived, not with sound, but with silence. 2 days later, just as I was beginning to enjoy the peaceful return of normalcy, I opened my mailbox to find a manila envelope stuffed so tightly it was bulging. Not folded notes, not neon marker, something thick, formal. Inside was a stack of papers, court documents, filed in small claims court. By Karen, she was suing me for harassment, emotional distress, defamation, interference with community authority, and, my personal favorite, willful obstruction of HOA operation through belligerent pool usage. I laughed so hard my ribs hurt. A lawsuit. An actual, real, filed lawsuit over a pool, over an HOA I wasn't even part of, over a fantasy land she had built inside her own head. But as ridiculous as it was, I didn't underestimate her. People like Karen don't need facts. They just need volume and confidence, and she had both in abundance. I spent the rest of that evening gathering every piece of evidence I had: the county certificate, the security camera footage, the flyers, the fake notices, screenshots from neighborhood chats, the recording of Karen's megaphone moment, copies of the outdated annexation proposals, photos of my property deed, emails from Janet. By midnight, I had compiled a digital archive so comprehensive it could have been submitted to the Library of Congress. And yet, even with all of that, my biggest advantage wasn't the paperwork. It was this. Karen had absolutely no idea how catastrophically she had just overplayed her hand. She thought filing a lawsuit would intimidate me. She thought dragging me into court would cement her authority. But all she had done was give me the perfect stage to dismantle the entire mythology she had built around her imaginary HOA kingdom. The courtroom was going to be her downfall. And the neighborhood. The neighborhood was going to witness every second of it. I arrived at the courthouse early on the morning of the hearing, mostly because I wanted time to breathe before stepping into whatever circus Karen had prepared. The building was a square, beige block of government architecture, functional, emotionless, and somehow always smelling faintly of old coffee and stressful decisions. As I walked up the steps, I spotted a familiar figure pacing near the front doors. Karen. She wore a navy blazer with one sleeve, still sporting a dangling price tag. In her arms, she cradled a binder, so overstuffed it looked like it was one argument away from exploding. Every few steps she'd stop, flip through a handful of papers, nod to herself dramatically, then move on like she was rehearsing for a courtroom drama she planned to star in. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with the triumphant fury of someone who truly believed this was the day justice, or her warped version of it, would prevail. "There he is," she shouted to a couple walking by. They glanced at her, startled, then scurried inside. The menace of Maple Ridge, the pool tyrant. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "Good morning to you too, Karen. You won't be laughing after today," she snapped, hugging her binder like a life raft. "The judge will finally understand what kind of chaos you've caused in our community." "Your community," I corrected, "not mine." "That's what you think," she muttered, then marched past me into the courthouse, chin high in the air. Inside, the waiting area was filled with the quiet shuffling of papers and the muffled tension of people preparing to argue about fences, barking dogs, parking spaces, and all the other small wars fought in suburban America. I took a seat, choosing one as far away from Karen as possible. She chose a seat directly across from me, staring like she was trying to set me on fire with her mind. I ignored her and reviewed my evidence, organized, clear, chronological. I felt solid, like a man ready to shine a giant floodlight on a long, complicated trail of nonsense. At 9:42 a.m., a bailiff appeared. Case 47B, Maple Ridge Estates Association, represented by Karen L. versus... He checked his clipboard. The defendant. I stood. Karen leapt up as though she'd been launched out of a cannon. "That's me," she declared proudly, as if being the instigator of a frivolous lawsuit was worth applause. We followed the bailiff into a small courtroom that smelled like old carpet and barely restrained frustration. The judge, a man in his 60s with deep lines carved into his forehead, looked like someone who had survived at least 4 decades of petty neighbor disputes and was holding on to sanity by a frayed thread. He adjusted his glasses. "Good morning. Let's make this efficient." "Oh, If only he knew. Karen rushed forward before he'd even finished the sentence. Your Honor, I have been the victim of repeated harassment, disrespect, emotional vandalism, and the willful undermining of an entire community's structure. Emotional vandalism, the judge repeated, blinking slowly. Yes, he has eroded the morale of the neighborhood, with splashing. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. A man behind me snorted. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy slapping her binder onto the plaintiff's table, like she was slamming down the 10 Commandments. Papers flew into the air, fluttering like startled pigeons. The judge sighed deeply. Ma'am, please take your seat. Karen obeyed, but only physically. Her ego remained standing. Now, the judge said, please explain, briefly, the basis of your claim. Karen stood again, ignoring the instruction to keep things brief. Your Honor, this man, this defiant, disruptive individual, has been using our community pool without permission. It's not a community pool, I muttered. She shot me a death glare. It should be. The judge raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, is the pool on the defendant's property? Yes, but, thank you. Continue. Karen puffed up like a toad. He is refusing to pay HOA fees, refusing to follow community rules, refusing to acknowledge the authority of the board. What board? I chimed in. You were removed from office. She whipped around. Illegally? The judge tapped his pen loudly enough to silence both of us. Plaintiff, do you have evidence that this homeowner is part of your HOA? Karen froze. For the first time that day, she looked uncertain. Well, she began, flipping through pages so fast they blurred. According to this preliminary annexation map from the developer, preliminary, the judge repeated, meaning not finalized? Yes, but the intention was very clear, and the community has operated under those guidelines for years. Has the annexation ever been legally recorded with the county? He asked. Karen's mouth opened. No sound emerged. The judge turned to me. Defendant, do you have documentation regarding the status of your property? I stood calmly and handed him the certified county record. Yes, Your Honor, this states my property legally remains outside the HOA jurisdiction. It has never been annexed. The judge read it, raised his eyebrows, read it again, then slowly looked at Karen over his glasses. Ma'am, he said, it appears you have filed a lawsuit without verifying that you had any authority over this man's property. Karen's face reddened. But he disrespected me. Not actionable. The judge replied. He undermined my leadership. You are not a leader of anything, he said plainly. He made a mockery of the HOA. No, the judge said firmly. You did. The courtroom fell silent. Karen looked as though she'd been slapped with a frozen salmon. Your Honor, there must be some mistake, she stammered. He closed the file. The only mistake was filing this claim. The court dismisses all charges against the defendant. I exhaled. Relief washed over me. Warm, clean, final. But the judge wasn't finished. He adjusted his glasses again, the way men do right before they deliver a devastating truth bomb, and based on the defendant's submitted evidence, he gestured toward my binder. It appears you, Ms. L., have impersonated an HOA officer, fabricated fines, misled neighbors, and repeatedly harassed a private homeowner. Karen's jaw unhinged. I didn't. I was just... Enough. He held up a hand. This court is issuing a restraining order. You are to have no contact, direct or indirect, with the defendant. Any further harassment, fabricated notices, or misuse of HOA authority will result in criminal charges. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Karen swayed like she might faint, but stubbornness kept her upright. No, she whispered. No, you don't understand. I am the HOA. The judge shook his head. Ma'am, sit down before you embarrass yourself further. But she already had. I gathered my documents while Karen stood frozen, binder dangling from her fingers. The bailiff approached her with the paperwork for the restraining order. She didn't take it, just stared at me with an expression equal parts fury, confusion, and existential collapse. As I walked past her, she whispered, "This isn't over." I glanced back. "It is for you." Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps. I paused, breathing in the warm air, not the tense, suffocating kind that had filled the neighborhood for weeks, but clean air, free air. For the first time, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Karen was done, legally, logically, officially. But the neighborhood, the neighborhood was just getting started. Because when I drove home, my phone buzzed non-stop neighbors messaging, asking for details, thanking me, sending screenshots of Karen's meltdown, already circulating through group chats like wildfire. Later that evening, someone uploaded a short clip of her courtroom rant. It went semi-viral within hours. Memes followed, jokes, parodies, a TikTok dance called the HOA Shuffle. By the next day, Karen had closed her curtains and disappeared from public view. She'd lost the battle, lost the war, lost the myth she'd built around herself, and without that myth, she had nothing left to stand on. But while Karen was fading into silence, the neighborhood was waking up. For the first time in years, people were talking openly, laughing freely, stepping outside without bracing for a clipboard ambush. And I knew deep down that the last chapter of this saga was coming soon. A chapter Karen would try desperately to control, but one she had already lost. The silence that settled over the neighborhood in the days after the court hearing was unlike anything I'd felt since moving in. It wasn't peaceful silence, not at first. It was the heavy, cautious quiet that follows a storm. A neighborhood-wide exhale where everyone peeked through their blinds, wondering if the tornado had truly passed or if it was circling back for one final touchdown. Karen's house sat dark, no blinds snapping open, no visor-wearing silhouette pacing the lawn, no phantom clipboard rising over the fence like a periscope spying on unsuspecting neighbors. She vanished so completely it was as if the universe had simply unplugged her power source. I didn't trust it. People like Karen don't just disappear. They retreat, they regroup, they plan. But the restraining order kept her away from me. And for the first time in weeks, I could walk into my backyard without bracing for accusations of unauthorized sunlight usage. I settled back into routine, trimmed hedges, swept the patio, replaced a pool filter Karen once claimed violated community aesthetic standards. I even sat by the pool at night with a drink, soaking in the rare sensation of tranquility. Then slowly, very slowly, the neighborhood began to thaw. A family walking their golden retriever waved at me. A couple from the cul-de-sac stopped to ask how everything turned out. A teenager mowing his lawn nodded in solidarity. It was the kind of friendliness people usually show newcomers. But here, it carried something extra relief. Karen had ruled the community through annoyance, intimidation, and sheer decibel level. Her downfall was like the lifting of a long, exhausting fog. One afternoon, while bringing in groceries, I found a small box on my porch, no name, just a sticky note that read, "For surviving HOA, Karen, the neighborhood." Inside was a custom mug printed with bold letters. Not your HOA, not your rules, not your problem. I laughed harder than I had in months. Word traveled. More neighbors emerged from what I can only assume were months, maybe years, of tyrannical silence. They shared stories. How Karen once counted Christmas lights because excessive illumination causes moral decline. How she followed delivery trucks to ensure proper package placement. How she once tried to ban pink flamingo yard ornaments because they encouraged rebellion. Turns out, my pool saga wasn't the most absurd thing she'd ever done, just the most public. And so, after a week of this communal breath of fresh air, I decided we all needed something more. Something symbolic, something therapeutic, a celebration not of me winning but of everyone finally being free. So I threw a pool party. Not just any party, a theme party titled Freedom from HOA Tyranny. I made digital invitations and slid them discreetly into mailboxes, careful not to violate the restraining order by sending one to the woman who had inspired the entire event. I decorated the backyard with red, white, and blue flamingos, put out a table of snacks labeled non-HOA compliant treats, ordered a cake with the words "Community Peace Restored" in bright blue icing, and the pièce de résistance, a big wooden sign I built myself, mounted beside the pool gate. Not part of your hoe, never was, never will be. The sign gleamed proudly in the sun. It was the kind of bold declaration that would have made Karen combust on sight, which was exactly the point. When Saturday arrived, people trickled in shy at first, then in clusters, then in waves. Neighbors who had barely made eye contact for years were suddenly laughing, mingling, trading stories like veterans of the same surreal war. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker playing upbeat music. Someone else brought a tray of ribs. A couple from 2 houses over arrived with a cooler full of sodas. Kids splashed in the shallow end. Adults lounged in chairs. The atmosphere felt lighter than anything the subdivision had experienced in ages. Doug, still holding his eternal mug of coffee, clapped me on the back. "You did good, kid. I'm older than you think," I said. He grinned. "Still, you handled things better than most." People drifted toward the sign and took photos with it, laughing as they posted them to group chats. It didn't take long for someone to make a cardboard cutout of Karen, complete with her visor and a tiny, fake clipboard, and place it beside the snack table. The word bubble above her head read, "Community standards are under attack." Everyone who passed by took a picture with it, even kids, even the mailman. I should have felt guilty. I didn't. Late in the evening, when the sky turned gold and conversations mellowed into soft laughter, someone asked the question, "So, now that Karen's gone, you thinking of joining the HOA?" The timing could not have been more cinematic. I gestured toward the sign. "That's my answer." People cheered. Someone raised a soda in a toast. Another shouted, "Make t-shirts." Someone else shouted, "No, yard flags." The whole backyard erupted with ideas for anti-HOA merchandise that would have given Karen a full-body stress rash. The party lasted well past dusk. When the neighborhood finally quieted and the last guests drifted home, I stood alone on the patio, listening to distant crickets. The pool lights shimmered across the water, casting gentle ripples against the tile. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt genuinely, profoundly at ease. The next morning, everything changed again. A for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. It leaned slightly, as if even gravity felt awkward about the situation. No announcement, no farewell letters written in pink marker, no farewell megaphone address about community unity, just the silent appearance of a realtor's sign on her lawn. Rumors spread faster than sprinkler water in August. "She's moving across the state." "No. She's staying with her sister until the embarrassment dies down." "I heard the HOA is forcing her out." "No. Her family staged an intervention about the megaphone." I didn't know the truth. I didn't need to. Some stories end without explanation. Some villains exit without curtain calls. A week later, moving trucks rolled up, curtains remained drawn, furniture was hauled out quietly. She avoided everyone. No confrontation, no parting glare, not even a muttered accusation. Her reign ended not with a scream, but with silence. When the last truck pulled away and her house sat empty, I walked to my gate, leaned on it, and looked at the peaceful street. No patrols, no surveillance, no notes, no megaphones, just ordinary life. I turned back toward my yard, reading the wooden sign once more. Not your HOA, not your rules, not your problem. It wasn't just a message to Karen, it was a message to myself. A reminder that standing up for your rights matters even when the threat looks ridiculous, especially when it looks ridiculous, because small tyrannies grow into big ones when nobody pushes back. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood healed, decorations returned to front porches, kids rode bikes without fear of being accused of unauthorized wheel rotation. People planted gardens without receiving passive-aggressive flyers about unapproved foliage. Life became normal again, better, even, and sometimes, when I sat by the pool at sunset, feet dangling in the water, I'd think about how close I came to letting someone else define the value of my home, my peace, and my right to exist without a self-appointed dictator breathing down my neck. Karen may have believed she was the law, but the truth, no one, not even an HOA, gets to own your life unless you let them. When all the madness was over, I realized something important, the kind of lesson you don't forget once you've lived it. In life, the battles we choose to fight aren't always about winning or losing. Sometimes they're about drawing a boundary and saying, "This is mine." You don't get to cross it, whether it's a pool, a home, a dream, or your peace of mind. You have a right to defend what's yours. And more importantly, you have a right to live free from the control of people who thrive on power they were never meant to hold. If you've ever faced your own version of a Karen at work, in your neighborhood, or even in your family, remember this. Your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and you're allowed to stand up, just like I did. Before you go, let me know in the comments, have you ever dealt with a Karen or an HOA nightmare? And if you want more stories just like this, full of drama, justice, and a little laughter, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss the next one.